Hello, everyone. So today we are trying something different. This podcast episode is recorded not only as an audio, but you can also view it on my YouTube channel, Simply Yava ESL. This is the first ever YouTube podcast episode, right? This is kind of exciting, kind of new. So I hope you find value for those of you who like to see people talking. We don't have that many visuals over here except the book, but for those of you who prefer YouTube, I hear you, I see you. Here you go. So, and today's guest is even more exciting. It's the one and only Carly Spina. Welcome, Carly.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on your podcast and to be the first one who is part of the YouTube. So I'm super excited. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I have followed Carly for years now, wherever I could. So on Twitter or Facebook, I have used her simplified. I really did use the simplified can-do descriptors to share with my colleagues. And I still link them when I create my individual language profiles because I find them so easily digestible. And when I heard that you came out with a book, Moving Beyond, of course, I had to have my hands on. Okay. So if you don't know Carly, I wanted to share your short bio. And Carly Spina has 16 years of experience in multilingual education, including her service as an EL teacher, a third grade bilingual classroom teacher, and a district-wide multilingual instructional coach. She's currently a multilingual education specialist at the Illinois Resource Center, providing professional learning opportunities and technical assistance support to educators and leaders across the state and beyond. Spina enjoys connecting with other educators and leaders across the country and beyond, and is an active member of the multilingual education professional learning community. Her first book, Moving Beyond for Multilingual Learners, was published in November of 2021 by EduMatch Publishing. And need I say more? So I am so thankful again that you're here, and let's not hold the beauty of our conversation from our listeners and viewers. Let's get right into the episode.
All right, let's go. I'm so excited.
All right. So I always start with the first question, and it's the same for everyone. I heard it on another podcast, and I said, what a great idea. You start with the same question. So I love stories. I grew up with stories. So tell us a little bit of your backstory. How did you decide to become an ELL teacher?
Yes. Well, so I grew up in Chicago on the north side of the city, about 15 minutes from Wrigleyville, for those who are familiar with the Chicago area. And it was a really cool neighborhood. It was a historically German neighborhood, but everyone on my block spoke a variety of languages. So it was like one of those neighborhoods that you like read about and you hear about, where like all the kids play outside together, and then like the streetlights come on in the summer, and that's when you go home. And we learned how to say like it's dinner time and like all these different languages because somebody would come out on the porch and shout it out. So it was a really cool neighborhood, and it really did influence my language journey. And I grew up in a home that really we just spoke English. That's the only language skill that we had. And so then as I went to high school, we moved to the suburbs. And I was able to take language classes for the very first time. And I always say this because I think it's so important to mention, like I learned my additional language out of privilege, not out of a necessity to survive. So I always want to point that out because that is a very, that's just important to note. And so I started to take Spanish as my world language. And I just continued, and I wanted to take Spanish because it was a very popular language in my neighborhood growing up. And a lot of my friends were heritage Spanish speakers. And so I wanted to know what they were saying and all the music that we listened to. We loved bachata. We loved all these different, music genres. So I grew up listening to that. So I continued when I went to college. I always knew I wanted to be an educator because I love kids. I love being with kids of all ages. I was always the person that people went to when they were like trying to plan activities or needed babysitting. I worked at daycares my whole life. And so I was like, this is what I really want to do. And then my college had just started an EL endorsement program. And so I was one of the first to graduate with that endorsement on my certificate. I wasn't the first, but I was one of the first. And I was really excited to have that. And my roommates were like, you need to, get your bilingual certificate. And so eventually I did that. And I was just so thrilled when I was doing my student teaching. My supervising teacher, her name was Madeline Suchia. She said to me, Carly, we work with the best kids in the school and we serve the best families in the school. And that stuck with me. So anytime later in my career, I had anybody as a student teacher, I always shared that message. And when Madeline just retired a few years ago, I shared that story and I said that you have shaped my career and how I see our students and how I see our families. And that's something I'll always carry with me. So
Absolutely.
that is a little of why.
that is a truly remarkable, how you have that one person say that one thing and how everything comes together, all of the, neighborhood and all of the, privileged learning, right? And everything.
Yes,
and all of a sudden you're looking at this and it's like, we do have the best kids. It's like, even at the end of a day, when you're like, your brain hurts, you're like, thank God.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about the kids.
So what grade levels do you work with or did you work with, and what's your teaching setup, separate classroom or closet classroom?
Yes.
Coaching mainstream teachers, all of that.
Yes. So it was so interesting because I know you and I were chatting a little bit before we recorded. My very first year, I was an EL teacher for third, fourth, and fifth grade. So we had, I think, about 60 languages at the time. And I was I was teaching in a trailer. So not even inside of the school building, right? What an awful message to send to kids, right? One of the most historically marginalized kids in our schools. And we said, you can't even come in, you're going to go out there. And it was a pullout program. And eventually, as I started to push in, and I even hate that word push in because it implies like tension. I was expected to support kids in secret and whisper and tiptoe into classrooms and not be seen and not be heard. And then my second year, I remember my principal coming to me I have great news for you. We're going to move you inside the building. And I said, oh, this is great for the kids. But it was a converted closet.
That's what
and I was supposed to be really pleased about that and really excited about that. So it was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting. But I love elementary. That's where my teaching passion is. So third grade is my sweet spot. And then later in my career, as I was coaching, I was in our middle schools a whole lot. And I developed a love for supporting our middle school students because there's just a lot of need that they have, and there's a lot of need I think that teachers have too as they support, right? As they support those students. And now I am in a position where I work with everybody from early childhood through high school. So it's been really fun to kind of learn and grow alongside all of these incredible teachers that I get to see.
That is awesome. And I like that you touched upon the fact that middle and high school is a high need. It's a completely different ball game. And that's where I am every single day. And it blows my mind. It still blows my mind. So probably could do another episode on just the quotes of my students, from funny to heartbreaking. So.
Yes, absolutely.
But your answer is the perfect segue into us chatting a little bit about your book. For those of you, you can see behind Carly, but also I have it in my hand, Moving Beyond for Multilingual Learners. I bought it recently and I started reading it. I haven't finished it just yet, but hopefully by the time this episode airs, I will. But the thing is that I started reading it, and within the first couple of pages, I'm like, exactly what she said. Okay. You talked about closet. I have one classroom, a regular classroom, but I move around. But I
Yes.
have my office in a closet, and wherever I have a few students, it is literally, not everybody can find it, so I have to label it better. Um, but uh, but let's talk a little bit about naming our programs and about the
Yes.
language that we use to talk about our students. And I'm not even talking about the English learners, okay? I'm
Yes.
talking about students with a variety of needs and how language in general affects that. So I will share a little example from the book that kind of like caught me, and I never actually thought about it. You mentioned that you were at a conference and you had this conversation on the topic of naming programs, and we as educators know everything has an acronym, okay? ELL, MLL, ENL, etc. And then so these are all of the programs, right? And I can never know any other acronyms. But the question that popped up, if any one school district assigns the kids in the gifted and talented accelerated programs an acronym, and I have not heard that, and neither have you, nor your colleagues, nobody. There's no this gifted and talented. It's somehow elevated, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
somehow
We say the full word. We don't make them, an acronym. We don't reduce them to just letters, right? We say the
GT,
entire, yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
So
So
let's talk a little bit about how can we identify the changes that need to happen in the overall culture, and how can we make those changes happen? I mean, it takes years and years and years, to move from away from ESOL, ESL, LEP
yes.
to something as a multilingual learner. So what steps can we take? What can we, you have some great examples, so why don't you share that?
So it's so interesting because again, like I love, like I am a very reflective person in terms of language and language choices. And I'll catch myself all the time like saying something and I'm like, oh wait, that doesn't fit. Like that doesn't sit well with me. And so I journal a lot on my own language choices and why I make certain language choices. But it's interesting because again, like for years, for decades, as we have served multilingual learners in our schools, we have reduced them to just acronyms. We have called them everything under the sun from like NEP or non-English proficient to LEP, limited English proficient. And we're always starting with something that a student doesn't have yet. But then when we're looking at, again, on the spectrum of gifted and talented or advanced or accelerated courses or anything like that, we give it the full name. And it was interesting being a part of that conference and that conversation because all of us around the table were like, that resonates with us. But like you said, it's shifting mindsets and it's encouraging that kind of a dialogue to take place because many times we're so busy. Our field is just so overburdened with to-do lists and reports and data and assessments and just all of the things that happen within a school day, a school week, a school month, all of it, that we rarely have those moments to say and engage in reflective conversations around language choices. So as schools and like again, like each state is a little bit different, but I know here in Illinois, we just made this shift a few years ago, I want to say, because we have a new state superintendent who did serve as a multilingual educator. And so she pushed the entire department, the state department, to shift from being EL to multilingual. So when we have that kind of support from the state level, it makes it a little bit easier for districts to also start making the shifts. And then when districts make the shift in language, then schools start to and teachers start to. But I know every school, every district is very different based on
Yeah.
the culture and climate and things like that. So, but as shifts are starting to happen, we have to accelerate, like we have to acknowledge each baby step along the way and celebrate each baby step, because every step forward is a step forward. And sometimes we just look at this goal of being so far, like, gosh, I can't believe it's this year and we're still doing that, or we're still naming it this. We have to kind of acknowledge all of the increments that will get us there eventually.
Absolutely. What struck me, every step forward is a step forward. And, I keep saying this all the time, that as human beings, from a human perspective, it is much easier for us to focus on the negative. It's
Yes.
raining, it's like coffee is not warm enough, right? It's easy
Yes.
to see the negatives. And it's the same thing. Oh my gosh, he bombed the test. Oh, he did this.
Yes.
Or, or she, she can't I just like
Yes.
literally
Yes.
witnessed the most amazing transformation that clicked like that. I have a student who arrived in March, and she's obviously the personality, an introvert and very quiet and everything, and she was probably scared just to be in general in this like outgoing, comfortable American environment.
Uh-huh.
And so she feels comfortable with me and with people in my class, but she does
Yeah.
not speak a lot. And it's really hard for me to gauge. I mean, I can give her tests all I want, but I
Right.
need to see like every day. And it's like some digging and digging and digging. So she was quiet and she didn't want to talk, and she thought she didn't know anything until last week we got a new student with zero English. All of a sudden, I kid you not, all of a sudden, I almost heard the switch go off, and she's like, "Oh, I'm not the new kid anymore."
Ah.
She started speaking more. She wanted to be helpful to that new student.
Oh.
And it's I just can't, you know what I mean? It
Oh.
was just
Yes.
amazing. It's
Yes.
amazing.
Oh.
So
Oh, that
we
just
want
makes me
to
happy.
focusing on I can't speak, I can't do, to wait a minute, I actually can.
Yes, yes, yes. And she can take that experience and share it and support
Absolutely,
another,
yeah.
another peer. Oh, that's
Yes.
incredible.
So
Oh, I'm so happy for
I
that.
know, right? And we just
Oh,
have to like focus on that just a little bit. Like you
yes,
said, not instead of like you said, low in both lines. No, they are developing. Okay.
yes, yes, yes,
They are, I don't know, they can do it. They
yes,
are motivated by some things rather than others,
yes,
and
yes,
so on and
yes,
so on. It's hard for us because we're teachers, right? We're not superhuman, we're human beings, right? We're
yeah,
not some
yeah.
sort of like, we don't have powers like that. So yeah, we also tend to use that language, but I think,
Yeah,
like you said, little step,
yeah,
becoming aware,
yeah,
moving forward, I
yes,
think
yes.
eventually we'll change it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And again, anytime we can engage in that reflective dialogue, or even just like sharing with a colleague, like, y'all, I used to say this, like, doesn't that like kind of ruffle your feathers that I used to say this? And like, I used to say that a student was low in both languages. And like, now I'm really pushing myself to say, no, 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 this child is developing in both languages
Yeah.
simultaneously, and like how that kind of shifts. And when I'm able to share that vulnerability too with my colleagues,
Yeah.
it gives them permission to also do the same. Like we can all engage in this kind of reflective dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you also share a lot of strategies that work and support our students, and I really like the visuals and the example where you say, "Publisher, I have this huge, fantastic resource for you. Use the ELL resource, a little gray box. Use visuals." Okay, this is a very generic suggestion, and I use it all the time.
Yes, yes.
But until I also started reflecting, it's like, to me, visuals is very clear. But recently, I looked at a text about ancient Rome, right? And
Mm,
in my mind, I'm so used to pulling up maps and
yes.
the pictures that it clicked to me that this is how, instead of reading this whole jumble of words, you can do it every paragraph and see the
Yes,
visual of
yes.
the paragraph. But anyway, I digress. My question is how can we use the strategically those scaffolds like vocabulary or oracy or visuals or anything else that you might mention?
Yes, yes. I think, for so long, like that was always like the band-aid that like I was given. Anytime I went to a conference, I love going to conferences. I love going to workshops. I'm always like just trying to learn more. But like it became very tired because again, it was always the same thing, like just add visuals and that's it. I
Yeah.
was like, but what else? What else can I do?
Yeah.
And I think like that whole experience of like, seeing all the publishers put their things together and then putting our kids as the gray box at the bottom, like it just made me think like, all of our students for so long have been viewed as an afterthought. So like, here's how to teach the lesson for everybody. And I'm putting that in air quotes, of course, like here's how to teach it for everybody. And then here's how to tweak it for your kids. And I'm like, well, no, like tweaks at the end, like that implies that my students are an afterthought.
Yeah.
And I can't teach in that way, right? Like we have to put language at the forefront and we have to be, like you said, like very intentional and strategic with all the scaffolds. And anytime I'm talking with teachers about ways for us to do this, I always think about like, okay, at the very beginning of instructional planning for lessons or for units, you have to be thinking about how are we asking students to engage with reading, writing, listening, and speaking about whatever the content is. And then sometimes I've had teachers say like, well, I'm not a language teacher. And I'm like, okay, teach your content without language then. Go ahead. I will watch.
Exactly.
I'd love to see it happen.
Yeah.
Because all of us, right? We're all language teachers because we're all using language to teach our content. So by default, all of us are language teachers. So I ask teachers like, let's think about the ways that we're asking students to engage with each of the 4 domains of language. And then, so say, okay, now we're teaching this science standard. Kids are going to be reading, this article. Kids are going to be speaking and listening with each other during, partner work maybe, or group work. And then they're going to be writing maybe an answer to a problem somewhere, or maybe it's co-constructed writing. Maybe we're going to co-construct a tweet at the end of our class to share our learning with the world. But looking at, again, like how can we embed all 4 domains of language and then say, okay, while students are reading, what is the scaffold that's going to be there to support the reading of the content? So is there going to be an annotated text? Is there going to be like an infographic kind of feel to it? Are there going to be, annotations about certain vocabulary and cognates that are built in there? As students are writing, is there going to be a word phrase sentence bank that they can, draw from to support them in their writing? So I think it all goes like, keeping language at the forefront and not as an afterthought, I think is the biggest piece.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And, I recently did presentation for my staff on text engineering, and it is a lot. And I think it's going to take a lot of repetition and a lot of maybe even me creating the materials from the stuff that they have, and maybe sitting down and everything. But text engineering, I always tell the story. A few years back, I had a newcomer in like 11th grade, like very little English and very big dislike for being here in general, because she left everything, where she's coming from. Loved her dearly, funny, genius at math. Like she had everything going, except she didn't like English. Okay, I mean, I don't like math. Okay.
Yep. I don't like English either most of the time.
So anyway, and the reading, I think if somebody is like listening to this is here she goes with Fahrenheit 451 again. But anyway, they were reading Fahrenheit 451, and I'm like, I'm at a loss. I have no idea what to do. There's no way this girl can read Fahrenheit 451. I couldn't find it in her native language at the time, but now we have access to that. And then I went on Teachers Pay Teachers, and some fantastic soul. I have to reach out to her. I think some fantastic soul had sat down and summarized all 3 parts of Fahrenheit 451 using literally the text engineering. She explaining the words in parentheses, adding pictures. And granted, I noticed that summary of a text is not the ideal thing for English learners, but it was great for me because I was then able to work with the text, and they were able to listen, they were able to see, they were able to do. So from there, of course, text engineering. If you don't know what text engineering is, I'm going to link the podcast episode that I did with Susan Patterson about it
Yes.
below it in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast platform and below this video. But in general, just making the language rich, not simplifying,
Yes.
but amplifying it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Making it accessible with whatever it takes. If it takes a translated word, perfectly fine. But if it takes a visual, as in like, a little icon of some sort, or whatever it takes. And that is such a huge help, as opposed to reading this whole long passage where everybody's overwhelmed, including the teacher,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think pacing is another thing too, that can sometimes I think as teachers, we're so overwhelmed with all of the content that we are being asked to teach to students. But as we talk about the pandemic and as we talk about all the effects of everything, like we really do need to focus on where students are, where they're coming in, no matter what, what proficiency level, what background knowledge they have on the topic, all of these different things. We really just have to meet kids where they are. We have to make, like you said, the content comprehensible for them. And we have to give them multiple entrance ramps to the content. So whether it's, again, like you said, like text engineering, or it's providing some multimedia pieces to kind of enhance some background knowledge and build a little bit more understanding. There's a lot that we can do, but that pacing, I think, can sometimes stand in the way, because we have all of this pressure to stay on this lesson by this time, and our unit test is on this day, and we need to be able to give ourselves permission to deviate when needed, so that we can support students with wherever they are as they come in front of us.
Absolutely. Now, can you share some activities or lessons that you've taught that worked well and your students enjoyed?
Yes, yeah. So I did one lesson around Cinco de Mayo, and it was with my third grade bilingual classroom. So it was a really cool lesson. I had originally heard about it after reading an article from Learning for Justice. Back then they were called Teaching Tolerance. And the author of the article shared a lot of misconceptions from the educator lens about what is Cinco de Mayo, and what they thought it was, and how are we celebrating it in a really authentic way that's not appropriating a holiday. And so my students and I took to social media, and we pulled a few images from Instagram, because we had a classroom Instagram at the time. And so we pulled up the hashtag Cinco de Mayo, and we started to sort of we saw people would post pictures of their little baby with a mustache decal on them, and a giant hat. And we were saying, okay, is this an authentic celebration of a holiday, intended to honor the history and the roots, or is this appropriation? And so again, as 8 and 9-year-olds, they were easily able to identify the examples that were authentic celebrations and authentic respect to the holiday, and lots and lots of examples of the appropriation. And then after we kind of did the sort, we came up with a list of things that we can all do as consumers of online content, as we explore different folks' holidays. And a lot of the students said, Mrs. Spina, this is not something that is connected to my family. We are Mexican American, but we do not, talk about this because we were not from Puebla. That was not our town. So this really doesn't I
have a student from Puebla. And
oh.
she is on point. So you know what I mean? But it's yeah. And but think Cinco de Mayo is Independence Day. A lot of people don't even know.
Yes. And so then it led to really good conversations too, because they're like, well, Mrs. Spina, what about like St. Patrick's Day? And so we had a lot of conversations about that. We did a lot of research on that. So it led to a lot of good conversations about, like how folks use social media, but also how folks are interpreting or misinterpreting, different pieces of information. And then like, how can we all equip ourselves with better tools? And how can we help support other people in their journey of understanding, the difference between appropriation and appreciation.
Yeah, that is so cool. And I think holidays is one of those things, it's so our department decided to do a monthly newsletter for all staff, which reminds me, we haven't done it this month, but we try our best. Every month we scour the internet and do a little bit of research and just share out with the staff, because we don't have all the students from all the cultures, right?
Yes,
but
yes.
even within your staff,
yes,
somebody who is, like either a descent of some kind, like it doesn't matter. Somebody knows something, but it's just, it was literally sparked by a conversation with a student last year, and the student was from Turkey, and she goes around Thanksgiving, she's like, why do they eat my country during Thanksgiving? Okay.
Yes.
We did this whole language lesson of
yes.
comes. I didn't know that Turkey apparently was wholesale of turkeys came out of the country Turkey, and that's why they're called that. Yes, it's it was like a turkey bird, and of course people are lazy, so they dropped the bird and it stayed turkey anyway. It's like, if you Google it, it's a pretty cool story. But we started doing those little, I sent it out because this was too good to keep it to myself. I sent it out to the entire staff that I worked with, and everybody's like, oh, this is so awesome. So I'm like, all right, well, let me just pick up. So every month we pick out some holidays and just kind of like send it out, and suggest that maybe they want to do it with their advisory, or maybe they want to do it in their class, or maybe they want to incorporate something, like not all Indians celebrate Holi, and not all Indians celebrate Diwali. Okay.
Yes.
We think that if you will come from that country, you automatically, are celebrating those things. So that has been super helpful for everybody, and the students also feel super excited because we validate them, and they like, oh, okay, well, this is the thing, this is
oh, I love that. That's so fantastic, and it's a great way to equip all of your colleagues, all of your teammates with really great information. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what can content area teachers do to help English learners who appear to have it all together? We talk about newcomers, and we can touch about newcomers after you answer this, okay? Because newcomers are a hot topic any time of year, right? But we have those students who are like, oh, he's fine, or she's just chatting away. And then they don't understand why they, what's happening, because they're not up to par, so to speak, right? So they seem to have it all together.
Yes. So that's so interesting, because I'm so glad we're having this discussion, because so many people are like, oh, I just need help with my newcomers. And we're like, no, all of your students, still need support. So students who are appearing like they have all these, like all of these different language skills, and they do, and that's good, and that's great. But our whole job, right, is to continue stretching our language of all of our students. So one thing that I love to talk about with folks who serve students who are like in between those levels, like 3 to 5, who are content teachers, get your students talking and creating. I always talk about this, but like, if you asked a kid like 20 years ago, what do you want to be when you grow up? They'd say like, oh, I want to be a firefighter. I want to, fly an airplane. I want to, be the president. And sometimes our kids still say those things, and that's great. But a lot of them are saying, I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be a TikToker. I want to be an influencer. And at first I used to say like, no, that's not a job. And now I'm like, that is a job. Like, that's a legit job, right? Like,
we are
more than we do. yes. But like, I want to kind of take that experience and like give them the platform to shine, and give them that opportunity to express, whatever it is their passion is, or maybe it's about the content. Like, you just finished wrapping up this unit on the revolution. Like, I want you to make a video that teaches another person about it. Like, how can we get kids who want to be content creators? How can we get them the opportunity? Because when they're creating content, that's the highest level,
Yes.
right, of the taxonomy, right? When
Yeah.
they're creating, that's awesome. And like, they're using all language domains when they're doing that. They're inviting in all of those things. And they're having good conversations about audience too. Like, who is your viewer? Who's going to be consuming this video? And then how does knowing the audience and knowing like the style, like if you're making a TikTok style video, how does that all fit together? How does that influence the language choices that you're going to make? How are you going to embed, some content specific vocabulary? How are you going to sequence it in a way that makes sense to everybody? So it's a cool way to embed a lot of like digital citizenship learning opportunities, but also like WIDA talks about now, like representing information. It's not quite like a language domain, but it's part of the new framework, So when we can give kids the opportunity to represent information and do it in such a way that like they're interested in, like they want to be YouTubers, like, all right, here you go. You're a YouTuber now. You're going to teach about the revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to share something. So in our district, we the communication is a competency. So like you have to communicate in a way. So there is, like you can use video recording software. You can do a one-on-one interview, or you can do a presentation in class. My students are petrified of all of it, and they stress about. So what we work on is the reframing, like, why are you afraid of this, right?
Yes.
Like, what do you think is gonna happen
Yeah.
if you share all of the beautiful messages that you have, right?
Yes,
So I understand, maybe they didn't understand, let's say, ancient Rome or of mice and men, or they worry about their accent, or they worry about the pronunciation. Like, I get that. But I think like the creative part of it. So what we started doing is every week I have like a little assignment. So we started with curiosity assignment, which means like, let's find out where things come from, right? So like, I literally had to Google this because I'm like into like, helping the students, cope with the overload of information and comparison game, right? So you have to have to not go down the rabbit hole. So there was a video of like, how did popsicles, get invented, right? Like sometimes you think about it, like, how come I didn't think of that, right? So a curiosity prompt where they list their favorite activities, favorite foods, and favorite something else. And then they pick one and say, oh, like, I wonder where this came from, And then they do a little bit of research. So again, reading, right? Listening, viewing, writing, organizing the ideas. And then so at first I asked them to write like a few paragraphs, and depending on the level, like if they're lower level, they can write a paragraph. If they're higher level, I really want them to give me with a thesis statement, And then from there, they can do a video, or they can actually present in class, because how are we going to overcome that fear of, miscommunication or judgment or anything? So I totally agree, but I think I just wanted to address that a lot of students, they have so much to share, but they're petrified. So as teachers approaching them, maybe starting out with like one-on-one interview, maybe like a small group, and maybe, just the kind of like milestones.
Yes. And I think that touches on such an important point too, is that the affective filter of all of our students, right? All of them, all of us, everybody has that invisible wall. And if we're feeling anxious, scared, upset, nervous, that wall goes up. We're not going to be able to express our learning or express our ideas or our thoughts very clearly when we're stressed. So when we can kind of create those lower stakes opportunities for them to share and build up that confidence, that will lower that affective filter and really make some powerful learning happen. Absolutely.
So one last question. How can teachers set up their classes for success?
Yes. Well, I always talk about encouraging like a linguistically safe space. I think a lot of times we're having a lot of good conversations about like SEL and making sure that we're looking at the whole child and all of these things. And we want our students to feel physically safe at school and emotionally safe at school. And again, all really good conversations, but linguistically safe at school is a different conversation that I want to make sure that we start to have with our colleagues and wherever we are. Encouraging linguistic play and linguistic risk taking. I always give the example of recasting. So when a student says something and it's not like perfectly grammatically correct, how am I going to address that? Because I want to make sure, again, I'm stretching students' language, but I'm also affirming what they say. So I had a student who said, like, I was brooming the mess, Mrs. Spina. And I love that they said it because they know that in English, sometimes we can verb our nouns. We can take a noun and we can make it a verb, right? So the student tried it out for brooming. And so I said, yeah, I know exactly what you're describing here. You took the broom and you were sweeping up the mess. You were brooming the mess.
Exactly.
Right? Like I'm gonna take that language and I'm gonna give it like a hug, and then I can supply them with the word sweeping, but I'm gonna do it in a way that builds up their repertoire and not like shuts them down. Like, oh, that's incorrect. We don't say that. We say this.
Yeah.
I have another student who shared it with me at one point. Mrs. Spina, I'm bad at vocabulations. And when this student said that, it like shattered my heart because the student really should be saying, like, I am so linguistically creative that sometimes I can take a root word and try out different endings, and I can play around with it until I come up with something. And instead of, acknowledging her linguistic creativity, she said, I'm bad at it. So she has this definition of herself as a languager, right? As somebody who uses language to communicate. And so that just broke my heart. So I always talk about linguistic risk-taking and linguistically inclusive and linguistically safe spaces in classrooms. So recasting as a strategy, elevating all languages in our spaces, making sure that it's audible and visible, not just English, but every language. And, if you have one student in your school, excuse me, that has that language, then we should be able to see it throughout the building.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, everywhere for every single thing, but it should be present. It should have a presence because that student has a presence.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we're affirming it.
Yeah. That was beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Carly. This was such a conversation. I could chat with you for hours and you know it. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast, for being the first to be on YouTube with me, for writing this book. I will link to this book. You can find it on Amazon, Moving Beyond for Multilingual Learners. I'm going to finish it soon myself. And so I'm sure people are going to want to connect with you. So how can they connect with you?
So I'm probably most active on Twitter. So you can find me at Mrs. Spina's class, or you can email me anytime. I love just like Zooming with teachers. I do a lot with Illinois, but lots beyond Illinois as well. So email me at carlymspina@gmail.com. I'm always available. I'm always down to chat and brainstorm and be a thought partner because we need more teammates.
Absolutely.
Many of us are just the only one of our roles, so we need teammates. So I'm always down to team.
Well, thank you so much again. And if you guys enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking the like and also the little bell below to get notifications when other videos / podcasts and everything else comes out. And thank you all for being here. And until next time.